and welcome to this episode of season 3 of the Dr. Tech Show, where myself, Pauline Roche, and Sweyn Hunter, and not often guests, as today we have Paul Russell, talk about digital topics, including the world of online communications and digital inclusion. In this show, which was the brainchild of digital storyteller, the late John Popham. And as we usually do, we ask about the weather. So let's go to our guest, Paul Russell. Paul, how are you? Where are you? And how's the weather been where you are?
Okay, I'm in Hollywood, but I was in Hollywood last time we did this, and that's the Hollywood in Birmingham.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be variable, but actually it's quite sunny. So
Okay.
it may be Californian, but I don't think I'm going to go out with shorts and a t-shirt.
Not just yet. Thanks very much. Sweyn, what about yourself?
I'm in Kirkwall in Orkney once again, and after a very, very cold December, it's a mild, balmy, although overcast and grey January that we've got at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And I'm also in Birmingham, and in my part of Birmingham, it is. I can see some blue sky out there, so looks
Must be
very
mine.
promising.
Yeah, it'll be coming
Yes,
your way,
we
Pauline.
have to share that, Paul. Yeah. It's great to see you again, Paul, and we're delighted you're able to join us again and talk about your new book, which sounds really fascinating. But before we get to you, we'll just go through some of the dates and events, and then we'll go through your bio. So thanks very much again. So for the dates, Sweyn, do you want to go through the date that you picked up and dates?
Sure. Well, there's all sorts of good, healthy living January options for events and weeks and awareness months, but I've steered clear of dry January and veganuary, where you're encouraged to eat plant-based food. I've steered clear of Doddy Aid, which is in memory of the Scottish rugby player Doddy Weir, and it's a kind of one of these add up as many miles as you possibly can during January. No, the one I've gone with is Walk Your Dog Month. Now, not everyone has a dog, obviously, but if you do, it's a month to encourage us to walk our dogs more and longer and more enthusiastically. So that's where I've been. And if you don't actually have a dog of your own, there is also a charity called the Cinnamon Trust, which helps the elderly, the terminally ill, and others who are in need of assistance with their pets. So you can volunteer to walk a dog if you don't have one of your own. So that's what I have picked up for this time.
Is that for UK and Ireland, Sweyn, or just UK?
Good
do you
question.
Think?
I think it's probably just the UK, but I'll look at that if you carry on. Because
I'd be very interested in that. And I think, sorry, my Alexa's reminding me to drink water when I cough. Thanks, Alexa.
Yeah, thanks, Alexa. It says English. Yeah. It's a charity registered in England and Wales. So there may be an Irish. There must be an Irish equivalent.
I'm sure there is. Yeah, no, that sounds really good. Thanks for that. And I know there are other organizations as well that you can join to walk dogs and stuff. I think that's a great idea. As you said, it's something that maybe older people might relate well to, both as either dog owners or even kind of a way of getting more company for themselves. People always seem to talk to dog owners when they're out and about, don't they?
They do. Yes,
it's a natural conversation opener, which I love. Okay, so on to events. I've just found two that seem particularly apt for the program. And one is actually this week on Wednesday, the 11th of January, called Tackling Digital Poverty, Learning from the Devolved Nations. And the link is on Eventbrite. And this is a Digital Poverty Alliance webinar. And it's going to hear from organizations across Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales who are working to tackle digital poverty. And the speakers for the session are going to include from Wales, Jocelle Lavelle, Financial Inclusion Project Manager, Wales Cooperative Centre and DPA Ambassador. From Scotland, Aaron Slater, Digital Participation Project Manager, SCVO and DPA Ambassador. And from Northern Ireland, Eva Henderson, Policy and Public Affairs Officer, NICVA, the Northern Irish Council for Voluntary Action. So that sounds like a really fascinating webinar, one I've shared with colleagues in the sector. And I'm sure Paul will know about it as well as a DPA ambassador himself. And on Friday, the 20th of January, there's an event called How We Can Fight the Cost of Living Crisis Using Technology. And we're all aware of the cost of living crisis, and if tech can help, then we're obviously keen to promote that. And this is an event organised by the British Computer Society Digital Divides Special Group, BCS Hampshire branch, and the Digital Poverty Alliance, bringing you a webinar on how using technology can help fix the cost of living crisis. Well, maybe fix, or at least start to address. And in the panel, this will cover why is digital inclusion essential to fight the cost of living crisis, and how can we help fix the crisis using technology. And the speakers for this event are Sarah Weller, NED for the Money and Pension Service, BT and Virgin Money, Matt Adam, the CEO of We Are Digital, a Birmingham-based organisation, Lee Smith from Digital Poverty Alliance Community Board Chair, and Ren Hui, founder and CEO of Lightning Reach. And that again sounds like one that we, you know, those of us in this sector would greatly enjoy and benefit from. Paul, are you involved with any of those yourself through the GPA?
Not directly, but I'm aware of them, and echo, you know, the support of those two events. And anybody listening, it's well worth finding some time, because the spectrum of digital poverty and data inclusivity is huge, and you know, and it's getting wider. So it is something that affects us all. So I recommend those sessions and others, and also, you know, if I can give a shout out for Digital Poverty Alliance, they're looking for more ambassadors. The biggest threat to solving this crisis is we all think the same. So the more diversity of thought, the better. So anyone listening who fancies to have a go, they can either contact me and I'll tell them what it means to be an ambassador, but the website is pretty good to look at. So I'd recommend people looking at that. Absolutely. And they're also very active on social media, on Twitter, etc. So it's very easy to keep up with what they're talking about. And they've done some great events. They're doing some great work. And I'm going to be signing up to be an ambassador myself. I think it's a no-brainer for us. So yeah. Excellent. I'm very happy to join you there. So we welcome you again, Paul. You've been a guest on the show previously, and we're delighted you're able to join us again. For those who don't know, Paul combines 3 decades of working in the technology sector with a passion for helping others get the most out of their ideas. He's a rare combination of both commercial strength and in-depth technology background, having sat on both sides of the fence as client and as provider. Paul's career has seen him move through the technology sector as consultant and management leader, experiencing multiple industrial settings with a bias towards the built environment, facility and workplace management. During his time with Microsoft as a partner on their advisory council, Paul got first-hand exposure to innovative thinking during the early days of the cloud computing shift. And this was a time that spanned CTO roles with the URS Scott Wilson, now AECOM, and Ricoh, where Paul led business change initiatives in digital twin for construction design and workspace design, respectively. Most recently, Paul enjoyed 6 years with IBM as a sales leader, focusing on smart building and infrastructure clients. Paul has developed a human-centric approach, having experienced the ups and downs of technology not meeting sustainable outcomes, and leverages a design thinking philosophy to help reframe problems and solutions. He's an excellent communicator, as we well know, facilitator and coach, able to inspire and motivate others to try out new ideas, explore possibilities, and consider there is no box. Paul now runs leadership coaching for business teams that use the design thinking philosophy to help others reframe problems and identify greater innovative results. He runs what he calls bullet hole and mother-in-law workshops, short, sharp participatory sessions to help people address immediate problems and opportunities using diverse thinking. And he uses this approach to be a mentor to young people via the BLIX network, supporting underrepresented groups grow startup ideas and find new jobs. And the main reason we have Paul on the show today is that in October 2022, Paul published his book, Even If It Was Free, Rediscover the Human Side of Selling and Buying Technology, a book about the conversation between sellers and buyers and how a trilogy of temptation masks decisions from human vulnerability and bias that undermine growth and ambition. The book includes stories from an eclectic group of thought leaders who amplify the importance of putting the human first when matching technology for problems. So we're both looking forward very much to hearing from Paul about the converger and diverger, which is mentioned in the book. And I also really want to hear about the free guy. So Paul, we're, as I said, delighted that you can join us again today. You're very welcome. What's happening with the book at the moment? What kind of reception is it getting? Thank you. So good to be back on, and thank you for inviting me. What's happening with the book? I've never written a book before. So it was an experiment. It was a chance to challenge myself, having left a corporate life. And so I've kind of took a chance to produce a book. And
it's been great. I mean, the book has inspired lots of different conversations with people, which is what I wanted. Great feedback from a really diverse group of people. And, I've learned a few things about myself, about, what do I think I could do writing a book, and also the process of writing a book. And that's been quite fascinating. I've learned loads of mistakes. Lots of people told me I'd make those mistakes, and I did. So anybody wants to know about writing a book, I can give you my penny's worth on that. But I think in terms of getting down on paper, what I think we all face, and I talk about converge and diverger, we're all of these things. The human brain is built to converge on problems because of our natural instinct for fight or flight, and we spend most of our time converging on things we don't know we are, because our brain is so complex, but we do. And it's when we converge on things that encourage us not to look for other ways, is when bias creeps in. And when bias creeps in, we get a digital divide, for example, or we rely on information that's not just correct. And that could be as each of us on this call, or as a corporate. And so we're all affected by this situation. And it's how we can diverge our brain, which sounds really simple. And we hear these phrases like, let's think outside the box, let's be creative, let's have a workshop. And we go along all these words, and they're the right things to say, but it's really hard to do. So how can we get more of our diverger skill back into the conversation? Because for sure, we are going to need it. And the march of technology, as I'm sure we'll talk about, is really removing the need to diverge, because the computer can tell you now. You just mentioned your Alexa chipping in just then. Why do you need to write down that you need to drink water when you know that Alexa is going to remind you?
Yeah, absolutely. So from the synopsis that you sent us, I understand that you've kind of interviewed various people in the book. Can you tell us a bit about some of the stories that you've uncovered?
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to do was, again, is I wanted to not be guilty of, I suppose, compounding my problem by saying, well, I've written a book myself, and therefore it's going to be all about my biases. So I wanted to make the book as very diverse as possible. So I just spoke to loads of people in my network, deliberately outside of my immediate network. So no one who I worked with when I was thinking about the book, and actually reached for people I'd never met before. So in the book, I think there are some like 16 or 18 very short stories from a very diverse group of people. We have a CEO of one organization, we have a data scientist in another, we have people who and my wife is in the book representing her father as someone with dementia, and how technology just doesn't work for someone in that situation. So a real diverse group of people who tell their own version of this converger diverger battle, and how they've overcome that through their own guile and wisdom and experience, to really give the book a bit of color. It also was quite handy because it meant that I didn't have to write all the words, which is a tip I would give to people, if you possibly can, is if you can get 20% of your book from other people, that's a help.
Did you, as a matter of just speaking about the formula for doing that, did you interview people or did you send them a survey, or what was your methodology?
Well, I was really fortunate that during the lockdown, like most of us living in this sort of world of the screen, I'm not going to say I thought ahead about the book, because that would sound like I'm too smart, and it definitely wasn't the case. But I created a group of people who were interested in design thinking. Talked about that in my resume. And design thinking is about sets of tools and methodologies, philosophies, if you like, to make us be more of a diverger. And that's how I would describe it. The book isn't about that. I talk about it very gently, but there's loads of great books about design thinking, so I'm not trying to replicate that. So this group of people that I created became the source for the contributors to the book. And as I said, some of them I've never met before. Some of them aren't in the UK. There's some in Switzerland. Bizarrely, most of the people in the group are in Switzerland. I'm not sure why that just happened to be, but that was the idea. And that source of people was my network. And I think we've all got a network. And the more we can exploit it and use it, it gives us a chance to just challenge ourselves to say, are we doing the right thing here? Are we thinking about the problem the right way? Are there alternative ways that we should look at this?
And did you find that people in the course of you writing the book had any discoveries or wanted to share things that they'd learned along the way?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, firstly, it was great fun because a lot of people were a bit frightened. You know, I don't, you know, I'd love to be in a book, but I've never written anything for a book. So there was some people who, like myself, were going through a bit of a sort of imposter syndrome type situation. There were some other people who were really grateful of having the opportunity to write down some of their stories, to reflect on what it meant to them, and also how that reflected on the way they approached their problems, their leadership style, their communication style. And it spun off numerous conversations about how people approach their problems at work. And they've shared things. It's been a two-way street, and LinkedIn is a wonderful tool. And, you know, some of them have very kindly taken photographs of them with the book, and we've been able to share some of the anecdotes around that. And that's just spawned lots of conversations for them as well. So they've benefited, I think, from the ability to share. And I don't know if that's what I wanted to do, but I'm so proud that that's what's happened, because I think the more that we take a little bit of humility towards these things, some vulnerability toward these things, we will find, and I think we'll get onto it, the bullet holes and mother-in-laws.
Well, please say more about that, because it's the learning from the book that I think people will be most interested in, what they will get from it if they read it. Because I do want to encourage people to buy it, obviously, you know, to, you know, get access to it, to libraries or whatever. But you know, what are the key kind of learning points in it? Okay, so you mentioned Free Guy, so I better set the context. So the book is based on a real person. I've called him Free Guy. He's a real person. He actually writes on the back of the book. So he's a real person. And he said the words, even if it was free. And the context was that when presented with technology costing millions of pounds to his company, despite having the money, the need, the competitive advantage, all the things that it should give him, he uttered those words, even if this is free, I don't want it. And, you know, that was the sort of an incredulous conversation in the core commercial world. You know, we know it happens. But when you've been through every gate and ticked every box and dotted the I's and crossed the T's, to hear those words is just kind of strange. So he's a real person. So the book is based around, why did he say that? You know, it was illogical, it was irrational. Why did he say that? Because we all have this inside us. And so that leads to what I call the trilogy of temptation. And, you know, I don't know if you guys are caught up with this yet, but in the last few weeks, there's a real buzz right now about something called Chat GPT. Yeah. I don't know why they didn't call it something a little bit more exciting, like, I don't know, smart, I don't know, something better. But anyway, so Chat GPT is a really interesting discussion, and it leads towards my trilogy of temptation thought in the book, which is we're innovative. We're becoming more innovative. We don't rely on Silicon Valley anymore. Innovation can occur on our smartphones ourselves. So innovation is one of the legs of the trilogy. We are surrounded by it. We want it, and we pay for it, or we don't, however it works. That then gives us more confidence to do better things. So ChatGPT is really a great example of how can we ask a computer a question and get a really human response to the point that we don't know it's a computer, that's talking to us, which I suppose where we all wanted to get to, and I say we all wanted to get to, a lot of people want to get to that point. And then the final part of the trilogy is that means we can go faster. You know, why do I need to go to university if I can learn everything by the computer? Or if I'm at university, can I get the computer to help me do my work? Or if I'm a salesperson, why do I need to learn my product when the computer can produce everything I need for it? And as an author, why do I need to write a book when I could type into this Chat GPT, which is like a chatbot, write me a book about a conversation between a seller and a buyer that talks about bias and illusion and all these things? Because I've done that since spending months and many hours writing a book. I put this into that chatbot and it wrote me a book. So you got book 2 now.
I don't know, but this trilogy of temptation, we're tempted, we're seduced by technology like this because it's free. So, you know, even if it was free, would I want to use it, is what a lot of people are saying right now. But of course, a lot of people are saying, my gosh, yeah, because this can give me an advantage. I can get a better degree mark, perhaps, or I can get a better job. I mean, so it's an interesting time. So the whole purpose of of the book was to sort of talk about, we have the skills in ourselves that we can use, and we don't want to forget about them, because the computer can never codify them. We can never get a computer to do what we can do, and we've got to remember that. So whether I'm a salesperson or a buyer or anyone involved in technology, the question about value, should I buy this or should I not, is important from a material point of view. But the under the iceberg discussions that we have in our brains and with each other are the ones we really need to pull out more. So I think that's where I was trying to get to, and that's why Free Guy was quite a nice way to frame it.
And who do you think your ideal audience is for the book? You know, do you want everybody to read it, or do you want specific people with specific job titles to have access to it?
It's interesting. I was told by many people, you need to think about who's going to read the book. You've got to have an audience, and I, you know, I've learned with this. So I didn't start off with that, which sounds crazy, but it's true. I then kind of shaped it a little bit more to salespeople. But I've had people who sell things that have nothing to do with technology. You know, I've had people who sell furniture and insurance contact me and say, you know what, selling. And, you know, if I'm selling furniture and someone doesn't want to buy it and says to me, even if it's free, I'd want to know why, you know. So, so firstly, I suppose it's that type of role. But the thing that I think fascinates me about what I've tried to do with the book is the three outcomes of the book. You know, what should I do about it, or what can I do about it, are how do we understand our problems better? How do we ask better questions to understand our problems better? And how do we tell better stories? And so we talked about at the top of the call about digital poverty. One of the problems with digital poverty, it's a complex situation. It doesn't follow a linear path to completion. You know, we can't just add up everybody who we believe is in a digital divide and send them, you know, brand new laptops and internet broadband, and do that in 6 months' time and go, do you know what, we fixed that. You know, I think we're trying to do that, and that's part of the problem. So we all face this issue about how do we understand the problem better, and the rush to assume we know the problem leads us into the two stories in the book about bullet holes and mother-in-laws. And the bullet hole story goes back to the Second World War, when the Americans were looking at a bomber and looking at data about the bomber, about where the bullet holes were on the plane. And the Americans kind of looked at the data and said, you know what, we can see where the problem is. The problem is we need to strengthen the plane in the places where the bullet holes are, which, you know, in one respect makes a lot of sense, because it was on the paper in front of them. It's what they could see. It was what they collected. It was tangible. It was evidential. So that's what they were going to do. But it took a different mindset, someone with a diverse background, someone who wasn't American, someone who'd escaped from Nazi persecution, to tell them they need to look where the bullet holes weren't. And, you know, and when they did that, they realized that the bullet holes on the planes that crashed and didn't return was where the places they needed to strengthen the plane. And we all face these problems where information in front of us gives us the confirmation that we're doing the right thing, but it's the information we can't see. And of course, why do we want to go and look for information we can't see? Because we're surrounded by it. You know, we can sit back and it just comes towards us. So the challenge for us is to force ourselves to go, do you know what, okay, I need to look in case there's something that I'm not seeing. That's a big change for lots of people. You know, CEOs turn to individuals, you know, busy lives, all the things we talk about. Why do I want to pause and go looking for something I can't see? And that tells the other story then about the mother-in-laws, which is totally different, less to do with data, but more to do with confidence that you've got the right answer. Where in India, an aid agency were looking at cases of malnourished babies and premature births and mothers who were starving themselves, and realized that the mothers were starving themselves because they didn't want to be big during childbirth. So they were starving themselves. So they created a program. They did this research. They did all the observation, and they created a program, and things went well. Mothers were healthier, babies were born healthier, and it was a success. Then the problem appeared again somewhere else, and they just applied the same answer, because we're good at that as human beings. Say, I've seen that before, I'll do this next time. Ask anyone who tries DIY and they'll probably admit to that. But of course, in this situation, it failed, and it failed because they'd assumed they knew the answer. So they didn't go looking for any blind spots. And the blind spot was the mother-in-law, because in that particular family setting, it was the mother-in-law that controlled the food. So the food supply that was coming from the aid agency was being diverted by the mother-in-law to her son and not to the expectant mother, and it failed. And so that's why I talk about bullet holes and mother-in-laws, and those workshops I've run for people have been outside of the tech industry who just want to take a moment to say, look, guide me through how I might find my own bullet hole or mother-in-law in my setting. And it's great fun.
That sounds great. I was a bit nervous about the term mother-in-law because it has such connotations, you know, kind of historically. But I trusted that you had a good story about it, and that does sound, yeah. I mean, I can understand that. Anecdotally, in the UK, working in the charity field, as I have done for many years, I know that some women smoked during pregnancy in order to keep the weight of the child low, so they could have an easier birth. And you know, that's down to poverty, and yeah, and it's sad that people feel they have to do that, but they do. So yeah, it's good to know what the situation is, so that you can then think about ways of addressing that. And was the Indian mother-in-law situation addressed? You know, has that changed? Do you know?
Well, I think the challenge that highlights, again, we touched on digital poverty, is when you've got a complex situation, complex problem that you believe was a complicated one, then you get into some real challenges. And I think we're facing more complex problems. It feels like that anyway. I mean, I talk in the book about this thing called VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous.
Okay.
Came from the Cold War. But now, you know, it feels to me, again, and I talk about this in the book, we have this on steroids now. You know, whether you want to talk about cost of living, or you want to talk about climate, you want to talk about education, you know, health, there are so many examples of where things feel out of control. And is it because we're trying to solve those problems with a complicated mindset? Or is it because we think they're so complex that the only way we can fix them is to break them down into sort of complicated little kind of programs? And no one seems to have the full way of doing that. That doesn't mean that we haven't got some great people working on it, but it does mean we have to take a moment to say, what can I do about that? And is it because we collectively are suffering from this bias that we all think we're doing the right thing, which is human, and we will close our mind to any diverse thought? So on a very small scale, we've all probably experienced that in team meetings or in our own way of life, where we might have a different opinion, and you know, whether our opinion will be listened to, or whether we feel we will be shouted down, or whether the trust in the organization that we work in is so good that it allows us to say, do you know, I don't agree, but to be heard, to be given the opportunity. And that touches on so many different things now. And you know, we talk about trust in throwaway often, and you know, you think about where trust falls down. When that happens, the convergence really kicks in, and when that kicks in, the risk is we'll not solve the problem, and the diverger will leave the organization, and that's where you suddenly get, you know, skill shortages because people leave because they don't feel they're being listened to. So it's a bit all over the place, which is why when I say about my book being quite messy, it's because I tried to capture some of this in those pages.
But as you described, it sounds like it has appeal across a broad range of sectors, not just one sector. Anybody who's trying to problem solve and use a kind of more open mindset, really. Sweyn, do you think this would have resonated in the public sector, where you're more familiar with things?
I definitely think so. The whole the complex and ambiguous problems that you're mentioning, Paul, sometimes they're called wicked problems. Things that have complexity, that involve activity that isn't sustainable, yet is in some sense essential, and all of that sort of stuff. I think the whole of, well, certainly the whole of local government is in itself a one huge wicked problem with several aspects. And I think that over the last few years, people have been a bit more open to different ways of doing things. So it's a very timely contribution to that sort of activity.
Mm.
Absolutely. I ran a workshop. You've talked about mentoring for the Blix network. I ran a workshop for that group recently, and we picked a problem. We just said, let's pick a problem, and I just picked a problem, fly tipping, because the fly tipping is everywhere. And so I took some photos of just up the road from me, and we said, how do we solve that problem? And we had an amazing conversation where we went from, well, we need more surveillance. If we had more cameras, we could capture them. Then we could, send them to prison. And then we had, from the other side of the spectrum, we had people going, well, maybe if we looked at, why people would do that. And it was fascinating. We used it not to solve the problem, because, that in itself is part of the problem, rushing to think the answer. But the one thing that came out was, when we think about the problems and how we might tackle them, it's actually asking ourselves, who has the problem? And, again, thinking about the mother-in-law example, who has the problem? It wasn't in that one case the expectant mother, it was the mother-in-law. So the mother-in-law has the problem. So how do we understand that it's the mother-in-law? So in the case of fly tipping, one of the ideas that we started to explore was the prevalence of people who will pick up your unwanted sofa or washing machine, and for 10 quid will take it away. And you'll probably think, you know what, that's fine, I don't care. And they can't take it anymore to a refuse site, so they dump it. So are they the person with the problem? How do we encourage them or make it easier for them? So it kicks up the phrase, how might we make it easier? And that prefaces everything. So how might we make it easier for people to get online? And every time I see a digital car park machine, I always think, how might we make it easier for people to park their car? Well, we're not. We seem to be making it harder. So it's almost as if we said, how do we make it harder for people to park their car? Whereas if we just said, how make it easier, we might find that we can still use cash, or there might other ways to park your car. But if you're not digitally savvy or have any technology or have any connection, you can't park your car. Doesn't make sense, really.
It's also the latest developments in car parking mean that you have to put your registration, your number plate into the machine. So instead of like in the old days where, if you had paid for 2 hours, you only use it for 1 hour, and as you were leaving, you gave your ticket to somebody else coming in a neighborly sort of way. So, they didn't have to pay. You'd already paid for the 2 hours parking. They could have an hour, down to your generosity. That's kind of done away with that kind of neighborliness that was happening, that friendliness that builds social capital. So technology, to my kind of way of thinking, was a negative, had a negative effect. I understand, they want to keep registrations, and if there's any accidents, they need to prove who was in the car park at the time and all that. But it
queuing in the rain to enter your registration number after 4 other people get theirs wrong is. I'm not saying I'm going to get mine right the first time either. Don't get me wrong, but it does make you think: is this really progress? Yes, indeed. Although I do personally like Ringo, the car parking app, because for me that's just very easy. But if you don't have a phone, or you're not that thinking in those terms, and that's the only way you can park your car, and that's a bad news.
I like Ringo. But in my book, there's a story from someone, and she's in Switzerland, and she's a data scientist, and her story to do with babysitting, and the use of technology, AI, to improve babysitting. And I love this story because it talks to this march of determination to codify everything into segments or columns or buckets. And in the story that she tells, she talks about in America, they're using social media to rank babysitters. So based on your social media profile, the algorithm will go off and figure out, well, is this person a 5, which is 100%, because they post nice pictures, they talk nicely on Twitter, they seem very friendly, they should be an ideal candidate to be a babysitter, or a 0, because they're offensive, they're kind of spreading malicious gossip. And the story it talks about is parents would be using this system to choose who would look after their children. And you kind of just think, oh my God, how have we got to this point where we're letting the computer put people into buckets that we have no real control over, and then feeding that out to people who go, you know, this is great. You know, I choose my babysitters based on this ranking service. And that's just the thin edge of something. And so this idea that, you know, technology, what do I say in the phrase? Just because you can doesn't mean you should unless you know why. And I think sometimes we've lost a bit of the why. Which is nothing new, of course. So no wonder Free Guy said this, which is even if this stuff was free, I don't want it, even though he asked for it. And that's the crazy thing with this. He was asking for this. We weren't knocking on his door. He said, I want this. Has anyone got the best solution? You know, I've got the money. So it kind of, it's different to me being a salesperson knocking on someone's door going, I've got something for you. It wasn't like that at all.
Your example of babysitting there is another example of life imitating Black Mirror by Charlie, what's his name anyway, you know what I mean, because there was a beautiful episode called Nosedive, which revolved around the whole of life being controlled by others, ranking of you on social media. All your opportunities, all your life was determined by how well ranked you were. I think it was obviously based on Uber's, you know, please give me a 5-star rating, please. But yeah, wow, that's astonishing story about babysitting.
Yeah, I didn't realize until like I'm a recent Uber convert, and I didn't realize that, you know, not only do you rank the drivers, but they rank you as well. So like, you know, you could be, you know, kind of abandoned by a driver who decided that you weren't a good person to have in the car, you know. So so the thing swings both ways now. So Paul, if you were back in Microsoft in your Microsoft days, what kind of things would you do differently now based on the learning that you've got through the book that you've written?
Great question. And it was in my time as a Microsoft partner that this story of Free Guy happened. I was with Microsoft in the room that day, and I think the thing that I would, you know, my younger self would be, I think probably just improve the way I would ask questions. I think if I had more time with Free Guy during the process, knowing what I know now, I think he wouldn't have said that, because I would have probably asked him some questions that I wouldn't have asked him then. And the questions I ask him now would be more about who's the person affected the most by this decision to buy technology. We'd assumed we knew. I subsequently went to work for him. I went into the industry that he was in, and I found out why or how important this question was to find out who matters the most. And I talk very briefly in the story in the book about we were building a tunnel around Stockholm. We're a construction company. We were doing the design. I was doing the technology as part of that. We've done many of these things before, so we knew how to do them. And the people in Stockholm stopped us before we started and said, no, you need to go into this room and you need to meet these people. And the people in the room were the citizens of Stockholm who have horrendous traffic. And we spent 3 days with them. We went out in their cars. We went out on the buses, in the taxis. We sat in their shoes. We experienced what it was like. And we firmly understood why they were having a tunnel built around Stockholm. And that empathy-led observation is something we didn't do back in the day with Microsoft. We said we did it, but the problem was we were deciding who the people that we were thinking about. And of course, as soon as you go, do you know what the person affected by this, Pauline, is Fred and John and Mary? And you go, okay, then at that split second, when you agree with me, is when we might go wrong. Because it might be someone else. It might be Sandra or Paula or whoever is the person we should have thought about. Not because of their names, but because of their situation that they're in. And that's why we design things that don't fit everyone. Going back to digital poverty and digital car parks is why it doesn't fit everyone.
Yeah. So where does data fit into all this? And how would you encourage people to be using data to, you know, gain more understanding?
Sure. And I think, and this is a great question because we're surrounding more and more, and it's never ending. And the more the computer can tell us what we need to know, the challenges are increasing on us, because our brains aren't built to be submerged the way they are. So we have to make shortcuts, and the data makes things easier. And it's a real tough one, because do we trust the brand that's giving us the data? You know, this new chatbot thing that I talked about, are we going to trust it? We don't have no idea where it's coming from, but suddenly we might trust it. So I think we have a bit of an education for ourselves in the way we sit down and say, Houston, we have a problem. And at that split second, that's a leadership thing, but it's an individual thing, is to suddenly make it a habit to say, are we looking at the right problem? That simple, are we looking at the right problem? Could then find that we're no longer thinking about the person we thought had the problem. It may be someone else. And what if we tried something different? And I talk in the book about 5 W's. So, you know, what is the problem? Who has the problem? What if we tried this? How might it work? And what works? That simple process that we've all probably done in various careers, that a computer can say, you don't need to do that. You don't need to do any of that, because I can tell you what you need to do. This is what you need to do. If we trust it, that's good. But if we just want a moment to pause, that's when our divergers mindset kicks in. And there are many, many ways. I don't think you can write them down. People try. There are many, many ways that we can go about doing this. And the one thing that I would finish on is storytelling. I think is really interesting. You know, the way we tell stories about the power of technology, I think is really going to change the way people will suddenly think, you know what, I don't quite get the story here. So I just need to ask a few more questions, instead of everyone's buying this. Everybody, 20% more people do that sort of thing that we get. Just challenge that a bit more.
Yeah. And it's, of course, as well, whose stories get told, because as you say, you know, if you don't have a diverse range of stories, then you're only going to get the kind of the standard boilerplate story that everybody expects and accepts. And I think you're more now about questioning the status quo and sort of saying, well, no, that's not, you know, that's not good enough, really. Sure. And that's a really positive thing. I can
say just on that, I mean, the chatbot thing I talked about, again, I keep talking about it. My daughter's getting married, and you know, I'm going to have to make a father of the bride speech. So I asked this chatbot to write me one, and let me tell you, it's pretty good.
Yeah,
it's pretty good. You know, you know, it's got empathy. It's human centered. It's not. I don't think you could know a computer had written it.
Yeah.
So if my daughter doesn't like me freewheeling after a drink, with the risk that I might say something she doesn't want to hear, she might just tell me to read what the computer wrote. And so, you know,
there's that risk. It is of the story. You know, as you know, we usually have a story or two after our guest, and it is the only story that we picked up today to talk about Chat GPT. It's that all pervasive in the sector at the moment. Sweyn's bringing it up, yeah. So the stories from CNET, why everyone's obsessed with Chat GPT, a mind-blowing AI chatbot. Yeah, I mean, it is everywhere. My colleagues in the voluntary sector are talking about it, how it might help with fundraising and PR and stuff like that. So it has kind of permeated the sector at the moment. This article from CNET says that the tool from a power player in artificial intelligence called OpenAI lets you type questions using natural language, to which the chatbot gives some conversational, if somewhat stilted, answers. The bot remembers the thread of your dialogue using previous questions and answers to inform its next responses, and its answers are derived from huge volumes of information on the internet. The tool seems pretty knowledgeable in areas where there's good training data for it to learn from. It's not omniscient or smart enough to replace all humans yet, but it can be creative, and its answers can sound downright authoritative. A few days after its launch, more than 1 million people were trying out ChatGPT, and I think that's probably increased, you know, exponentially since then. I know that people are advising people in the UK to use it when the Americans are asleep, because you know the volume of inquiries is so much that it's getting overwhelmed. And the other question is, of course, when is it going to be monetized? Because, you know, it seems like a no-brainer really for OpenAI to start monetizing it. But, you know, with the word open in its title, I'm hoping that they've got more benign thoughts about it. But
I
yeah,
love I love that one
Big.
word in that quote you said, Pauline. It's not omniscient or smart enough to replace all humans yet.
Yes. Yeah.
Like as if in 3 weeks' time it may be.
Well, I
Well,
think I mean, I'm a big advocate, I'm a big fan and follower of the sort of Alan Turing kind of world. And, you know, that whole idea of the Turing game, and, you know, am I talking to a computer or am I talking to a human being? And it just feels in the last few weeks, because for years and years and years, that's never really been proven. You know, you kind of know when your computer's talking to you. Just think about if you've got to go to ring your media provider and they give you a little chatbot to talk to, you know you're talking to a computer. And so, but now with this, I've seen some examples which are pretty compelling to say, I'm talking to a human being here, right? So I think Turing would be probably smiling at this right now. Maybe that's what they should call it.
the Turing smile. Yeah.
But the interesting thing is, how do you then monetize that? And if people can make money, they will, and they're already beginning to do so. And again, going back to the divide, skill sets and access and all the things we talked about with digital poverty, is making it even wider. You know, because suddenly it's like I'm missing out on this. I can't get to it because I can't. You know, I don't have the wherewithal. I don't have the skills or the devices or the connection. And this is now exciting, but I can't get to it. So again, this trilogy of temptation is just growing and growing and growing. And the people who are growing it because they're doing the right thing, because that's what they believe they can do, are they forgetting the blind spots, or do they believe they know what the blind spots are? And do they believe they're fixing those problems? Because I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, no, I agree. And unfortunately, because we live in a capitalist society still, until the revolution, then not only will people want to monetize this, but they'll want to stop other people from benefiting from it because they can make more money that way. And it's sad but true. Obviously, that's not what drives us, but it does drive other people. So, you know, we have to manage that and try and overcome.
So even
that.
if it was free, we might.
People
have said to me, well, you've got written a book about even if it's free. It's like, it's a paradox. And you know, I had one person say you should have put a question mark at the title and all these sort of things. And if I ever say to someone, say, Paul, even if it's free, you're going to do this, it's kind of, I've caught myself out with my title, but I couldn't choose the title any differently because they were the words he said.
No, that's always a good way to go.
A good way to think about it.
Yeah. So what's happening outside of your kind of authorship, Paul? What else are you up to, and what's happening with the Digital Poverty Alliance, and where can we help with that?
Well, I think firstly your show is brilliant because it really does promote you know not only digital threads and themes and discussions, but also talks back to what it creates in terms of the gap and the digital exclusions that we increasingly see. So Digital Poverty Alliance is just one of many, but really leading the light to encourage more people to look for those blind spots and to encourage people who might connect blind spots together to say, do you know what, there's a way, you know, for example, we talk about libraries. I think at the start, some great work done by libraries. I spent a lot of my time writing my book in Solihull Library. And I sat there and in my naivety, I thought libraries were for this purpose, but I saw them now, you know, offering other services. So, and I learned a lot about the blind spot in my head about the library service. And so the high street, you know, what's happening in the high street, that we then could, more people are in the high street than there were before. I read something recently that because of travel and working from home and all these things, there's more people in the local towns as opposed to the cities. So what opportunities do the high street offer, maybe through the library service, to allow people to be connected, to uncover blind spots in terms of skills that they have and sharing those. So those conversations haven't gone away, but I think we are beginning to see some kind of being pulled away. And what could we do with those things? So being a digital poverty ambassador, if you have skills in those areas, I think it's massively important to, if you can, put your hand up and you know, join that group because they need help. Not because they're not very good at what they're doing, just that as soon as they realize that they think they are, that's when the problem starts. So keeping it as open as possible is really important. And in terms of what I'm doing some mentoring. I love doing that. I'm doing some coaching, which I love doing that. And I've talked to people about my book. And mainly because I'm playing with my idea, do I need to write another one, or is it enough? Have I reached my limit? But also helping people write their book. I've got 2 people who said, my God, you know, you've written a book. Maybe I should try. So things like that, keeping me busy and being on your wonderful show.
I know you're also an active volunteer because we've met each other in real life. Volunteering, yes, yeah. So I know you keep physically, you know, active and sort of.
Yeah, I've since we bumped in Parkrun, I crazily have decided to enter the London Marathon.
Oh my goodness!
And I successfully got through the ballot, so I've now.
No, you have to do it. Are you representing a charity, or are you?
Yes.
Just doing okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to say what charity that is?
Yeah, I'll be running for Alzheimer's because sadly my father-in-law passed away a few weeks ago, and he never got to see the book because he's mentioned at the very last story from my wife, you know, because they bought him a smart TV. But as anyone knows, well, smart TVs, they're a paradox in their own right, really. So, you know, he didn't want a smart TV, he just wanted a TV. Well, he didn't want a TV, he wanted someone to put the snooker on for him. And there's no technology out there that can do that. I don't believe. And that's a problem.
It's interesting you should say that, because I was at the launch of a video created by a group in Birmingham called Thrive about people coming online during lockdown. And in fact, hopefully we'll have somebody from Thrive on to talk about that in a future show, where they kind of just covered stories of people who had never been online before. And I spoke at the launch and I said, you know, it's great that you're covering this and that people want to learn, but in fact we also need to be lobbying the companies that make and the individuals that make these technologies to make them more accessible to people for whom digital is not as intuitive as we'd like it to be. And I'm sure you'd agree with that, you know, we know there's intelligence out there. We know that people have created amazing things. But the more they can do to enable people who aren't online for whatever reason to not lose out because of that would be beneficial. I know Kyra Ullman from also involved in Digital Poverty Lines talks about this a lot as well. And you know, just because you're not online doesn't mean you're not a digital citizen still, that you don't have rights in the digital space.
Absolutely.
It's a bit of a soapbox for me, I'm sorry, but it's, you know, I'm sure you can relate to that too. Yeah. So was your father-in-law, was your father or your father-in-law, sorry? Father-in-law, yeah. Was he able to use a smart TV for anything, or have, you know, right? Oh,
no, I mean, and he wanted a smart TV because he'd seen ours in the early days of his dementia. And to a point he could control it with the controllers that you get. And eventually that became harder. So we went for one of these simple big button controllers. But again, that became harder because, you know, he wouldn't remember to switch the TV on. So, you know, it ended up becoming, in fact, the best thing we bought for him was he loved Perry Como, and we bought him a simple box where we could upload the music, and it had a lid, and you just have to lift the lid. And if you lifted the lid, it would start to play. And it was enough for him to get some pleasure, because even though sometimes he wouldn't remember what the lid was, a simple picture of Perry Como and a little message to say, lift the lid to listen to Perry Como, in the last few months, I think gave him the most pleasure. And that box was produced by, and I forget now, not a mainstream organization. And you suddenly think, take that thinking to the smart TV people and say, how can you make a TV function like that? Where they just want snooker, or, you know, repeats of The Chase, or whatever it might be. That would be a smart TV. So my wife's story is about that box, that TV, and even if the TV was free, she wouldn't buy one again. No. I think that's important.
But the box she would. So that'd be great to hear about that. Yeah, if you can send us details of that, Paul, I'll message you again.
I wish. I mean, the box is downstairs. Otherwise, I'd be lifting up to you. It's called, it drove the family mad, because he would have it full volume, and the volume controls underneath, so we couldn't change the volume. So the family would have a go at me for going, "Why did you get in that box?" Because all we get is Perry Como. But I didn't care, because, you know,
he was happy. Yeah.
Yeah, I will send you some details of that. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, it sounds really good. You know, we as you know, we try and kind of pick up on things that are coming and being talked about in the space so that we can help other people. But sometimes it's the simplest things
Yeah.
that are the most useful. You know, that I have to admit I'm a kind of a victim of Facebook Reels, and I'm kind of constantly scrolling to kind of see what else they're talking about.
Mm.
And sometimes you see good things, and they are very simple, you know.
Mm.
So the simpler the better, really. It's
Yeah.
you know, as long as people still feel they're being thought about in what they need, then that's what's important. So if people want to get involved in kind of to contact you or to get involved with the DPA or any other thing you're involved in, Paul, what's the best way for them to do that, to follow up on this on the show?
Sure. I mean, they can just email me. And my email address is quite simple. It's Paul at even if it was free, which is the title of the book. So .biz.
.biz, B-I-Z, yeah.
Even if it's free.biz. And you know, I'm happy. I'll talk to anyone about any subjects related to technology for sure. And I love mentoring. So anybody who's looking for, you know, maybe prepping for an interview or looking for, you know, they want to change their career, yeah, just contact me. And anyone in the Midlands, it'd be great because I'm a West Midlands person.
Yeah.
And don't want to travel so much. So
cool. When you say mentoring, do you mean in any sphere, or you mean technology mostly? Or
well, it's funny. I think less about technology now. I kind of used to be, that was everything to me, but now it's less about that, and it's more about those three things. Do I understand the problem enough, like the job I'm going for, or you know, the problem I'm having at work? Do I are there better ways for me to find out, like the questions? Can I be more inquisitive? Can I be more curious? And how do I then present myself differently? You know, the storytelling. And so those three aspects, which in my call the antidote to the trilogy of temptation, is what I find I'm myself mentoring people about.
Cool.
But yeah, if people just reach out and contact me, that'd be great.
Okay, one last question before we close the show. Are you still on Twitter, or have you given it up?
I've given it up, kind of. Yeah, I've given it up. I haven't quite got social media. Really, I don't know if that's the right answer, but
well, I'm just curious. I'm asking various people because it's people are mixed between those who are sticking with it, as I am to a certain extent, but I've also applied for Mastodon and for Post. I've been accepted on Post as an alternative. So I know there's been a lot of conversation about it.
I use it for when something happens. I always, whatever it might be, I always go on Twitter just to look to see whether I can find two sides of the story.
Yeah.
I never engage, but I just go and have a look to see, you know, whether it's Prince Harry. You know, can I see the other side of that story? Where do I find that? I'm intrigued to see probably how the algorithms are working, because it's the algorithms that really do create the biases that we get locked into. And you know, I fell foul of those a couple of times with my children saying, you know, that post that you just shared with us, that's not real. That's a fake account. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Good to have these conversations.
So
it's great to see you again, Paul. Thanks very much for
both.
joining us. And we hope that your continued success with the book and your mentoring. And yeah, please do contact Paul if you want to follow up on anything that he's mentioned in the show. All the links will be in the on the YouTube page after the show. So thanks again, and thanks for joining us today. Have a great week. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.